My superpower was invisibility, but when the school's king dared to threaten the one thing I truly cherished, I unleashed a force I had sworn to keep buried, shattering not only his reign, but also a decade of family secrets. High school, for me, wasn't a social hierarchy. It was a minefield, and I was the person trying to cross it by holding my breath and trying to become invisible. My name is Maya, and my superpower was blending into the wallpaper. I was the quiet girl, the one who always had a book open, even when walking down the crowded hallways. Not because I was a genius, but because a book was a shield. Look busy, look engrossed, and maybe, just maybe, people won't see you. My real sanctuary, though, wasn't a book. It was my sketchbook. Inside its worn leather cover was my entire world. Worlds, really. I drew charcoal landscapes of planets no one had ever discovered, intricate portraits of characters from my imagination, and sometimes, just the way the light hit a dust mote floating in a sunbeam in the library. It was the only place I wasn't shy. On paper, I was bold, loud, and fearless. In the real world, my voice was a whisper, and my eyes were permanently fixed on my own scuffed-up sneakers. This strategy of near invisibility worked, mostly, except for one recurring 6'2" glitch in the system named Ethan. Ethan was the king of our high school, and he reigned with a crown of arrogance and a scepter of casual cruelty. He wasn't just a jock, he was the asterisk jock. Quarterback, chiseled jaw, a laugh that sounded like a rock slide. And for reasons I'll never understand, his favorite pastime was poking at my quiet little world. It was never anything big enough to report. A shoulder check in the hall that sent my books flying. A loud comment about my homeless chic clothes as I passed his table in the cafeteria. He would snatch my pen out of my hand in class, just to watch me fluster and stammer, unable to ask for it back. It was death by 1,000 paper cuts, each one designed to remind me of my place at the bottom of the food chain. I never reacted. I'd just absorb the humiliation, my cheeks burning, and wait for him to get bored and move on. Reacting was like throwing blood in the water. It only made the sharks circle faster. The day it all changed started like any other. Lunchtime. The cafeteria was a symphony of chaos, shouting, laughter, the clatter of plastic trays. I'd secured my usual table in the far corner, tucked away behind a pillar, offering the perfect blend of isolation and a vantage point to sketch people without being noticed. I had my headphones in, music turned down low, and I was working on a new piece, a girl with wings made of shattered glass. It was intricate, and I was completely lost in it, my pencil scratching softly against the paper. I was so focused, I didn't notice the shadow until it fell over my page. My blood ran cold. I didn't even have to look up. I could smell his cologne, that overbearing, cheap pine scent that always announced his arrival. Well, 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 Ethan's voice boomed, slicing through my bubble of peace. Look what we have here. Little Mouse is drawing her little fantasies again. His two cronies, Kevin and Josh, snickered behind him like a laugh track. I froze, my hand hovering over the paper. My heart started doing a drum solo against my ribs. Please, just leave me alone, I whispered, my voice barely audible. What was that? Ethan leaned in, cupping a hand to his ear dramatically. I can't hear you. You gotta speak up, little mouse. He smirked, his eyes gleaming with that familiar predatory light. His gaze dropped to my sketchbook. What you got there? Another weirdo creature? Let's see it. Before I could react, his hand shot out and snatched the sketchbook off the table. My breath hitched in my throat. It felt like he'd just ripped a piece of my soul out of my chest. No, please! The words came out louder this time, tinged with a desperation that made his grin widen. He held it up, flipping through the pages with a theatrical flourish for his friends. Ooh, look at this, guys. Spooky trees, sad-looking girls. What is this? An instruction manual on how to be a freak? Every page he turned felt like a physical blow. Those were my secrets, my dreams, my safe places. And he was defiling them, holding them up for ridicule in the brightest, loudest room in the school. Tears pricked at the corners of my eyes. I stood up, my hands trembling. Give it back, Ethan, please. He stopped on the page I'd just been working on, the girl with the glass wings. He stared at it for a second, and then a look of pure contempt twisted his features. This is pathetic, he spat. And then he did the one thing I feared most. He held the book with both hands, his knuckles turning white as he prepared to rip it in half, right down the spine. Something inside me snapped. It wasn't a thought. It wasn't a decision. It was an instinct, ancient and deep, that erupted from a place I had kept locked away for a decade. The loud, chaotic cafeteria, Ethan's sneering face, the terrified gasps of the people watching. It all seemed to slow down, the sound fading to a dull roar in my ears. He started to tear. The paper began to groan. In that split second, the muscle memory I had spent years forcing into dormancy took over. Ethan was focused on the book, his mistake. I didn't go for the sketchbook. I went for him. My right hand shot out, not in a clumsy slap, but with a trained precision. My fingers wrapped around his left wrist, my thumb pressing down hard on the nerve cluster on the back of his hand. He yelped, a sharp, surprised sound, his grip on the book faltering. In the same fluid motion, I twisted his arm, stepping into his space, using his own forward momentum against him. It was a simple Aikido wrist lock, a kote gaishi, the first move my father ever taught me. Ethan was bigger, stronger, a quarterback trained to take down linebackers. But physics and leverage don't care about your position on the football team. His body was forced to follow his wrist, contorting into an unnatural arc. His eyes went wide with a mixture of pain and pure, unadulterated shock. He stumbled backwards, trying to regain his balance, but I already had him. I pivoted on my heel, dropped my center of gravity, and pulled. Ethan, the untouchable king of our school, flew over my hip as if he weighed nothing. He landed on his back on the linoleum floor with a sickening, hollow thud that echoed through the now completely silent cafeteria. The sketchbook fluttered from his loosened grasp and landed softly on his chest. From the moment he started to tear the page to the moment his back hit the floor, maybe 10 seconds had passed. Pure, shocking silence reigned. Every single eye in the room was on me, the invisible girl standing over the fallen bully. And in that dead silence, I looked down at my own trembling hands, and I had no idea who I was anymore. For a few eternal seconds, the only sound was the hum of the fluorescent lights above. A dropped fork clattered onto the floor somewhere to my left, the sound as loud as a gunshot in the vacuum. Everyone was staring. Not at Ethan, sprawled on the floor like a discarded doll, but at me. Their faces were a gallery of disbelief. It was the kind of attention I had spent my entire life avoiding, and now it was a physical weight pressing in on me from all sides. My carefully constructed cloak of invisibility had been burned away in a single, terrifying flash. Ethan groaned, a low, pained sound that broke the spell. He pushed himself up onto his elbows, his face a mess of confusion and fury. His eyes found mine, and the shock in them was quickly being replaced by a dark, simmering rage. His cronies, Kevin and Josh, just stood there, their mouths hanging open like a pair of codfish. They looked from Ethan on the floor to me, then back again, their simple brains unable to process the data. My own body was finally catching up with my actions. A violent tremor started in my hands and spread through my entire body. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving behind a hollow, nauseous fear. What had I done? This wasn't me. The girl who flipped the school quarterback over her hip wasn't the same girl who couldn't make eye contact with the lunch lady. Quote _ 11 _ Ethan rasped, his voice tight with humiliation. He was still the king, even on the floor, and kings don't take well to being dethroned. I didn't answer. I couldn't. Words were a foreign language. Instead, I bent down, my movements stiff and robotic, and picked up my sketchbook from his chest. I clutched it to my heart like a holy relic, its familiar weight the only thing grounding me to reality. Then I turned and walked away. I didn't run. Some part of me, that old forgotten part, knew that running was a sign of weakness. I walked. My back was straight, my head was high, and I didn't look at anyone. The sea of students parted for me, their whispers following me like a swarm of insects. I could feel their eyes on my back, 100 burning pinpricks of awe and fear. I walked out of the cafeteria, through the main hall, and straight into the girls' bathroom, where I locked myself in a stall and finally let my body collapse, sliding down the cold metal door to the floor as I gasped for air I didn't realize I'd been holding. The summons came 10 minutes later, crackling over the school's PA system. Maya Wilson, please report to the principal's office. Maya Wilson to the principal's office. Of course. My stomach twisted into a knot. I splashed cold water on my face, staring at my reflection. The same wide, scared brown eyes stared back, but something was different. A flicker of something harder, something I hadn't seen in a very long time. Principal Thompson's office smelled of stale coffee and disappointment. Ethan was already there, sitting in one of the chairs opposite the desk. He had an ice pack pressed against his lower back and a self-righteous scowl on his face. The moment I walked in, he pointed a finger at me. Quote underscore 13 underscore Mr. Thompson, a balding man whose patience had clearly worn thin long before I got there, pinched the bridge of his nose. Quote underscore 14 underscore, he said, his voice heavy with exhaustion. Quote underscore 15 underscore, I opened my mouth, but the shy girl was back in control. Quote underscore 16 underscore, I managed, the words coming out as a pathetic squeak. Quote underscore 17 underscore, Ethan shot back, a master of feigned innocence. Quote underscore 18 underscore, it was my word against his. The quiet freak against the golden boy. I knew how this story was supposed to end. But this time, I wasn't the only one with a secret. I knew, and Ethan knew, that for 10 seconds I had owned him. The memory of his shock, the feeling of his weightlessness as he went over my hip, was a strange, empowering warmth in my chest. Mr. Thompson sighed. Quote underscore 19 underscore. The warmth in my chest vanished, replaced by ice. Quote underscore 20 underscore, I breathed, the word slipping out before I could stop it. Quote underscore 21 underscore. My panic seemed to confirm Ethan's story in the principal's eyes. He saw a girl terrified of her parents finding out she'd finally snapped. He didn't understand. It wasn't my dad's anger I was afraid of. It was his disappointment. It was the look I knew I would see in his eyes. The look that said I had broken the most important promise I had ever made to him. Mr. Thompson picked up the phone. I spent the rest of the afternoon in a state of suspended dread, waiting for the bell to ring, signaling my walk to the gallows. When I finally got home, the house was silent. Too silent. I saw his car in the driveway. He was home from the dojo early. I pushed the front door open. He was standing in the living room, not looking at me, but staring out the window. My dad, Sensei David Wilson, was a man carved from granite and patience. He was my rock, my teacher, my whole world after my mom left. I had never been afraid of him. Until today. He turned around slowly. His face was a stone mask, but his eyes were filled with a deep, profound sadness that shattered my heart. He didn't yell. He didn't demand an explanation. He just looked at me, his gaze dropping to my hands, which I was wringing nervously in front of me, the hands that had thrown Ethan, the hands he had spent years training, only to have me swear to never use them that way again. His voice was quiet, almost a whisper, but it carried the weight of a decade of unspoken grief. "You used it, Maya," he said, his voice cracking on the last word. "After everything that happened, I thought we agreed, never again." The words hung in the air between us, heavy and sharp. Never again. It was more than a rule. It was a sacred vow, a pact made in the sterile white quiet of a hospital room 10 years ago. It was a promise I made to him over the sound of my own mother's weeping. And I had just broken it over a sketchbook and a schoolyard bully. "Dad, my voice trailed off. What could I say? He tried to grab my book and I panicked. It sounded so trivial, so childish, when weighed against the memory that haunted our silent house. "I'm sorry." He shook his head, a slow, weary motion. "Sorry doesn't fix it, Maya. You know what can happen. You, of all people, know the cost." He wasn't just talking about a suspension from school. He was talking about something far darker, a past I had tried to bury under layers of shyness and invisibility, the very reason I became the quiet girl in the first place. He walked over to the fireplace mantel, his back to me. He picked up a small, silver-framed photo. It was the only picture of her we had out. My mother. She was younger in the photo, her smile brilliant, her eyes sparkling with a light that had been extinguished long ago. She couldn't control it either, he said, his voice thick with unshed tears. It starts small, a moment of lost temper, a reaction, and then it grows. It takes over. I can't watch that happen again. My own eyes welled up. I'm not her, Dad. Aren't you? He turned back to me, his face etched with a pain that was a decade old but still raw. What you did today, that's how it began with her, defending herself. Then defending others. It felt righteous, I know. It feels powerful. But that power has a price. He put the photo down and walked towards me, stopping a few feet away. You made a promise that you would walk away, always. That you would use your training only for discipline, for balance, never for violence. You broke that promise. The finality in his voice was like a door slamming shut. What does this mean? I whispered, dread coiling in my gut. It means you're not ready, he said, his voice hardening into the tone of a sensei, not a father. You've forgotten the most important lesson, control. So, we start over, from the beginning. And so my punishment began. It wasn't detention or being grounded. It was far worse. Every day after school, I no longer went to my room to draw. I went to the dojo. Not as Maya, the quiet art nerd, but as David Wilson's daughter. He stripped away everything I had learned. We went back to the absolute basics. Stances, breathing exercises, the endless repetitive polishing of foundational katas. He was relentless. He pushed me harder than any of his other students, his eyes critical, searching for the slightest flicker of the anger or fear that had surfaced in the cafeteria. The school, meanwhile, was a different kind of torture. The story had spread like wildfire, mutating with each retelling. I was no longer the invisible girl. I was Crazy Maya, the girl who took down the quarterback. People didn't whisper when I passed. They fell silent, their eyes following me. Some looked at me with fear, others with a strange, newfound respect. Ethan and his crew gave me a wide berth, their usual taunts replaced by resentful glares from across the hallway. They wouldn't dare touch me, but their hatred was a palpable thing. The worst part was that I hadn't solved anything. I had just traded one type of torment for another. Before, I was a target because I was weak. Now, I was a pariah because I was dangerous. I still ate lunch alone in my corner, but now the isolation felt different. It was no longer a shield I chose, but a cage others had built around me. Weeks turned into a month. My knuckles were raw from the makiwara board. My muscles ached constantly. My sketchbook gathered dust on my nightstand. There was no time, no energy for art. There was only the dojo, the smell of sweat and polished wood, and my father's disappointed eyes watching my every move. He was trying to break me down, to rebuild me into someone who would never lose control again. But with every grueling session, I felt something else hardening inside me. Not control, resentment. He was so focused on the ghost of my mother, he couldn't see me at all. He didn't see the daily, grinding humiliation I endured from Ethan. He didn't see that I hadn't sought the fight. I had just finished it. All he saw was his own past failure, a monster he was terrified I would become. The breaking point came on a rainy Tuesday. I was exhausted, emotionally and physically. We were sparring. Or rather, he was demonstrating, and I was the practice dummy. He moved with a grace that defied his age, his blocks and parries effortless. My own movements were sluggish, clumsy with fatigue. "Focus, Maya," he barked, sweeping my leg and sending me to the mat for the 5th time. "Your mind is wandering. An opponent will use that. They will hurt you." I pushed myself up, my chest heaving. "There is no opponent, Dad," I yelled, the frustration finally boiling over. "There's just you, punishing me for something that wasn't my fault." "Not your fault?" His voice was cold steel. "You chose to engage. You chose to use your strength against someone weaker." "Weaker?" I laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "He's the king of the school. He has tormented me for years, and you did nothing. You told me to be a ghost, to be invisible? Well, I tried that, and it doesn't work." "It is not about working," he roared, his composure finally cracking. "It is about being better. It is about not becoming the bully yourself." "Can't you see that?" "What I see," I screamed back, tears of anger streaming down my face, "is that you're so afraid of me turning into Mom that you'd rather I just lay down and let the world walk all over me. That's not strength, Dad. That's cowardice." The word hung in the air, instantly regretted. His face went pale, the anger draining away, replaced by that same deep, hollow wound I'd seen the day he got the call from the school. He looked utterly broken. "You don't know what you're talking about," he whispered. He turned and walked to his small office at the back of the dojo, shutting the door behind him. I stood alone in the middle of the empty room, my own angry words echoing in my ears. I'd gone too far. I sank to my knees, guilt warring with my fury. After a few minutes, I got up and walked to his office door, ready to apologize. I pushed it open without knocking. He wasn't at his desk. He was kneeling in front of an old, locked footlocker tucked away in the corner, a chest I hadn't seen him open in years. It was unlocked. The lid was open, and inside, lying on top of a pile of yellowed newspaper clippings, was a familiar leather-bound book. It wasn't a sketchbook. It was a scrapbook. And on the very first page, a headline was visible in the dim light: "Local woman, martial arts expert, arrested in vigilante attack." Underneath was a picture of a smiling, confident young woman. It was my mother. My breath caught in my throat. I'd seen that picture before, but only in the context of family albums. Mom at a tournament, mom smiling after a promotion. I had never seen it attached to a headline like that. Vigilante attack. The word seemed alien, impossible. My mother, the woman whose absence was a gentle ghost in our house, was a vigilante? My dad looked up, his face stricken. He hadn't heard me come in. For a moment, we just stared at each other over the open chest. The secret history of our family finally laid bare between us. He slowly reached into the chest and pulled out the scrapbook, his movements heavy, as if it weighed 100 pounds. He didn't try to hide it. The time for hiding was over. He patted the floor beside him, a silent invitation. I walked over and sat down on the tatami mat, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. He opened the book. The clippings told a story I never could have imagined. It started with small articles: a mugger disarmed and left tied up for the police, a group of thugs who were terrorizing a neighborhood found unconscious in an alleyway. The papers called her the Shadow, a mysterious guardian angel cleaning up the city's darker corners. The articles were full of praise and speculation. My mother, Elena, had been a hero. Then, the tone of the articles began to change. A suspect was hospitalized. Quote, 26, __1 headline read. Another described how she had tracked a man who had assaulted a woman from her dojo, not to turn him in, but to confront him herself. The man ended up with 2 broken arms and a shattered collarbone. My mother, it turned out, hadn't just been stopping crimes. She had been doling out her own brand of justice. The final clipping was the largest. Vigilante Shadow unmasked as local instructor. There was a mugshot of her. The brilliant smile from the mantelpiece photo was gone, replaced by a defiant, angry glare. She'd been arrested, convicted of aggravated assault, and served 2 years in prison. "She started just like you," my dad said softly, his voice raspy. "Someone was getting hurt, and she knew she could stop it. It felt right. It felt just. But the line between protector and aggressor, it's thinner than you think." For her, the anger took over. Every fight became a crusade. She stopped seeing people. She only saw targets. By the end, she was picking fights, looking for injustice everywhere, because the fight itself was the only thing that made her feel powerful. He closed the scrapbook. When she got out of prison, she was different, hardened, angry at the world, at the system, at me for not supporting what she did. She couldn't let the anger go. A few months later, she left. She said she couldn't live in a world where she wasn't allowed to fight back. He finally looked at me, his eyes pleading for me to understand. "When I saw you standing over Ethan, Maya, for 1 second, I didn't see my daughter, I saw your mother, and it terrified me." Everything clicked into place. My shyness wasn't just a personality trait, it was a shield he had helped me build, a defense mechanism to keep my mother's legacy at bay. His relentless training wasn't a punishment. It was a desperate attempt to teach me the one thing his wife could never learn: control. He wasn't afraid of my strength. He was afraid of my anger. "I'm not her, Dad," I said again. But this time, the words were firm, confident. What I didn't enjoy it. I hated it. I was scared. I wasn't looking for a fight. I was just trying to protect the only part of myself that felt real. I gestured vaguely towards the house, where my sketchbook lay abandoned. He was trying to destroy my world, and I just stopped him. A single tear traced a path down his cheek. "I know," he whispered. "I know you're not. I was just so scared. I couldn't see past my own fear. I failed your mother, Maya. I saw her going down a dark path, and I didn't know how to pull her back. I wasn't going to fail you, too. But in trying to protect you from her fire, I almost smothered your own." It was the most honest he had ever been with me. In that small office, surrounded by the ghosts of the past, we finally saw each other clearly. He wasn't just my sensei, and I wasn't just his student. We were a father and a daughter, bound by a complicated love and a shared history of pain. The next day, things were different. The training continued, but the harshness was gone, replaced with a quiet understanding. We worked on control, yes, but we also worked on confidence. He taught me how to stand my ground without throwing a punch, how to use my voice as effectively as a wrist lock. He encouraged me to start drawing again, even buying me a new set of charcoal pencils. At school, I made a change. I stopped hiding in my corner. I sat at a table in the middle of the cafeteria, my sketchbook open, daring the world to look. And the world, it turned out, was less monstrous than I imagined. A girl from my art class, Sarah, came over and asked to see my drawings. She loved the girl with the glass wings. Soon, another kid joined us. Then another. I wasn't quote, _37, quote, _38, anymore. I was just Maya, the girl who could draw. And, as the rumor mill still churned, the girl you probably shouldn't mess with. Ethan never bothered me again. I'd see him in the halls, and he'd look away, a flicker of that day's shock and humiliation still in his eyes. I hadn't just beaten him. I had dismantled the entire illusion of his power. I had shown everyone that the king could be toppled, and he knew it. There was no satisfaction in his fear, only a quiet sense of peace. The minefield of high school was still there, but now I knew how to walk through it. Not by being invisible, but by being myself, unapologetically. My strength wasn't just in my hands anymore. It was in my voice, in my art, and in the quiet confidence that I was in control of my own story.